Recognize. Umbral Walker. D01. Recognize. Evil Sans Carne. D04.
Live from the Team Cave in Happy Harbor, Rhode Island, I'm Rich.
And I'm I-Hsien.
And this is Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. I'm trying to stay trot right now, everyone, because we have Evil Sans Carne, a.k.a. I-Hsien Sherwood, co-host of the Total Party Thrill podcast with us.
Hey, everyone.
Total Party Thrill is an Emmy-nominated role-playing game podcast whose high production quality, brilliant content, and charismatic hosts were one of the podcast inspirations for which we do what we do here on Whelmed. And I am so glad that I-Hsien came on to join us. Welcome to the cave.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for reading the paragraph that I sent you. That's very nice.
No, that's good. I got the PayPal. We're good. Before we begin, though, I want to remind everyone that during these interviews, we will be discussing the entirety of the Young Justice series. So consider this your spoiler warning. No leashes on the interviewees. So opening up, I-Hsien, tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you are. Who are you?
That's going to take forever. Man.
Yeah?
No, here, I am a deep and meaningful person, but for our listeners, I think the only thing they actually care about is that I'm the co-host of Total Party Thrill. We are like a year and a quarter into our podcast. We have weekly episodes. We talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We talk about role-playing games, and we give advice for people who run RPGs and play in RPGs. All different kinds of wacky stuff, sort of loosely based around 5th edition, but honestly, our group has played, a dozen different systems. So, there's something for everybody at Total Party Thrill.
There really is. And for those of you who've already been listening to the podcast, you know that we have our Canary Debrief in every episode. And in the Canary Debrief, we talk about storytelling in general, from novel writing and short stories to also role-playing games, themes, and ideas that you can draw from the episodes. I can't recommend Total Party Thrill highly enough for those people running a game of any kind. If anything, just tune into the story recaps, man. I am gripped as to how this Eberron campaign is going to end.
Oh, God, there's so much pressure now.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. Better be good.
Don't worry, everyone dies.
Outstanding.
Look, Belshazzar is Lex Luthor. Everyone knows that.
Then he saves the world?
Obviously.
Obviously, right.
Hashtag Vandal Savage did nothing wrong.
I don't think Caleb and I can argue with any of that.
Right?
But we should.
And there's so many shades of the God Emperor of Mankind in Vandal Savage. I feel like he just knows better than I do. And he looks like a caveman, which just endears me to him in strange ways.
Interesting. See, we don't get this side of you in the show. I think Shane edits it all out.
Oh, we split the editing. I try to leave it in, but then I get sleepy.
I see. Nice. All right. So on to the show topics. We met at Gen Con in person for the first time.
We did.
And I can't remember how the subject came up, but Whelmed came up at some point because Caleb and I had already announced that we were working on it. You had said that you just lit up, actually. That might have been the alcohol, but you lit up when I mentioned it. So when did you first watch Young Justice? Did you see it when it first came out, or did you just see it when it was on Netflix? And what was your experience with DC Comics or comics in general before you saw the show?
I think the first season had finished, had been broadcast, and it was before the second season actually came out on television. I discovered it because, I was unemployed at the time. I had just finished grad school. I was looking for work, and so I was sitting around a lot, and I had found Avatar: The Last Airbender. I totally binged that, and I was like, okay, what do I do next?
Actually, Korra came out that same year. As a Young Justice as well.
Oh my God, I can draw a straight line from being on Reddit and just browsing a stupid thread about nothing that matters at all. And there was this gif of Mako, burning some papers with his hands. Just this is stupid. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but that looks really cool. And I like that guy's hair. So I'm going to find out what that is. And so then I watched Korra, and then I was like, this is pretty good. I should probably go watch the original. I binged that, and then I was like, I need more stuff. And one of the first things that came up in my search was Young Justice. People were like, no, this is good animation. The storytelling is excellent. You should definitely check this out. The second season, it's sort of in the works. So I just blew through the first season, and then as the second season was coming out, I was watching that, and I think was it Green Lantern happening at the same time?
Yeah, Green Lantern, the CGI Green Lantern was happening at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing that too. I liked that not as much as Young Justice though, because I'll say I had watched off and on the old Teen Titans.
Yeah.
Which I liked, but I didn't love.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely despise Teen Titans Go. in my life experience, I have always loved superheroes, but almost specifically DC superheroes. I think Superman is probably like one of my earliest memories because it came out in 70, like the Christopher Reeve first one, I think came out in 78.
77, 78, yeah.
And then that was like basically when I was born. So like there isn't a time in my life when Christopher Reeve wasn't Superman and like I didn't want him to be my dad. So like watching Connor is so much like, I know, I understand.
That's fantastic. Caleb's going to love that.
I wish I could smash things. But when I was like 14 and threw a tantrum, I just like, you know, my books were on the floor and like now I was upset and I had to like put them away quietly.
Are you a weapon or a hero, I-Hsien? That's what I need to know.
Sadly, I think I'm a weapon. I've often wielded.
Nice. And so you read comics when you were young, but I mean, were you deep into the comics or not so much? Did Young Justice, but aside from the Superman Connor connection, did you know much about any of these other characters that were in the show?
When I was younger, I didn't have any money. So I rarely read physical comic books, but I watched so much television. So all of the animated shows that were on were really sort of like my main insight when I was young into these characters. And so, you know, when I got older and then Batman the Animated Series came out, that was sort of like the second wave for me because I was looking at this and going, wow, this is dark. In like a good way, in like a positive way. And I was old enough where I could appreciate that and not just sort of be turned off by it.
Yeah.
And then, so I didn't know all of these sort of sidekick characters as well. I knew them tangentially. And then I was introduced more to them with Teen Titans and the DC animated universe. Justice League and Justice League Unlimited were amazing. But Young Justice, I think, was really the first time that I got to feel like I knew Aqualad, Superboy, certainly Miss Martian. I'd never even heard of Artemis.
So we've already had a recording of the Secret Origins series we're doing, where we're going to go into the backgrounds of all the characters, particularly the ones, I mean, we started out with Robin, second one's going to be Aqualad. We'll get into Miss Martian and Artemis as well. Artemis has a really interesting history because I was also as deep in DC as I am. There's been a few characters named Artemis, and this one was unfamiliar to me. And it's pretty amazing what they pulled out of the backlog of DC to bring to the screen. Which actually kind of brings me to a little bit to our topic, actually.
I was actually just going to say, perfect segue.
Yeah, because when we were talking about having you on the show, I asked about what it is that kind of jumped out at you about the show, or when you think about Young Justice, you know, what gets to you. You know, we've set up a few interviews with different people, and we've got some pretty interesting and diverse answers, no pun intended. I asked you what it was about YJ that jumped out at you, and I loved your answer. I was excited about it. And what was that answer, I-Hsien?
One of the benefits of an ensemble cast is that you can have a diverse team, you know, and I think for people watching it, it makes you feel included. It makes you feel represented. You can see yourself on the screen. And superheroes specifically are so much about wish fulfillment and seeing a character that you can really identify with, and you understand their struggles and they're going through a situation that maybe is a metaphor for something that you're going through in your life. You know, one of the reasons the X-Men, I think, resonates with so many people is, you know, they're outsiders for whatever reason. If you're LGBT, if you are a person of color, you may not feel like you fit in with society at large. You are discriminated against for nothing that you can actually help. And the X-Men are going through the exact same thing all the time.
Right. And with the X-Men too, you have a diverse cast as well, because these characters, they were pulling from all over the world. Yeah, that was kind of my point. With Young Justice, they start showing what they can do with DC.
Yeah, and I think in understanding how the creators picked which characters were going to be part of the original team, I think really demonstrates that there was a commitment to having a diverse cast.
Yes.
And that was almost immediately one of the first things I noticed about the show was, oh, okay, it's not just like 4 white dudes.
Right.
You know, it's not like random tokens shoehorned in either. I did think it was interesting that Aqualad, Calderon, was basically a new character.
Yes, absolutely. He was not basically a new character. He was entirely a new character introduced for the show.
So Aqualad existed before, but Calderon did not.
Correct, yeah. So the original Aqualad was actually Garth, and we get that little bit in the episode with
I
Downtime.
hate Garth.
Yeah, so the original Garth character was, as Gigantor as an Aquaman fan I've been my whole life, there's no argument that, man, do you think Aquaman is lame? Garth was rough. Garth was a rough kid to love back in the day. And so when they introduced this new Aqualad, I also had some kind of I was like, oof, did they just shoehorn someone in here or did they do something good? And Calder is brilliant. He's a brilliant character and so well accepted by both fans and DC Comics that they used that character as an inspiration for a version of him for the standard quote unquote worlds of DC multiverse as well.
Yeah, I think I sort of compare him to Harley Quinn, who also was created for an animated series.
Right.
And now is basically beloved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a fantastic analogy and entirely true. And as much as we got of Harley in the animated series and since then, we really get a lot of this brand new character in the series. Mm-hmm. And Calder's story arc in the second season as well. So stressful that my wife, who was watching it for the first time, had to take a break because she just fell in love with Calder right off the bat. And the whole second season arc, she's like, I don't know what's happening here. This is crazy. This is stressing me out. We had to take a break for a little while because we could binge it at that point because I'd already owned them and had watched them a bunch. And she finally watched them with me and loved them, I'm glad to say. But yeah, Calder was the start. But aside from that, even in the first episode, there were 4 guys, right? And then they introduced Miss Martian. And of course, they have Miss Martian who, starts off, talked about this a little bit in the show, starts off as this kind of, ditzy TV stereotype of a girl. And we later find out why she's like that, But at the beginning, I was like, man, I hope they do something better than this. Turns out Miss Martian's story arc was amazing across the board. Then they introduced Artemis, and then they had Zatanna, and then second season, they end up introducing so many other female characters as well. Are there specific episodes, character arcs, besides, Superboy, that jump out at you when you think back on the show? Like,
I think maybe it was like halfway through the first season when you find out that Artemis is Asian.
Oh, right.
Because I'm half Asian. So these are things I clock, and I would not have guessed it until Cheshire shows up, You get the idea. Okay, her blonde dad is Taskmaster.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, Cheshire's her sister? Is Cheshire adopted? Oh, no, her mom's in a wheelchair. Her Asian mom is in a wheelchair. Holy crap, she's just a blonde Asian. And then you look back and go, oh, she's always been Asian.
Yeah, exactly. And not knowing who her dad was until later on, I can see how that would be a little, what's happening right now, right?
So is that something that, as a comic book reader, you already knew?
I honestly didn't know anything about Artemis when I first started reading it. There's definitely some daughters of criminals that have made their ways into the heroic, venue. The Quizmaster, his daughter became a hero named Spoiler, who actually ended up becoming the 4th Robin and Batgirl down the line.
Stephanie, was Cassandra Cain?
No, that's Cassandra Cain was actually trained by the League of Assassins. This is Stephanie Brown.
Okay.
And Stephanie Brown was actually in the second season. She was one of the kids that were kidnapped by the Reach in the second season. We actually get a little bit of a shot of her real quick, which means they were planting seeds for season 3 already. Yeah.
I did love all the cameos.
Oh my gosh. And these cameos weren't, in many cases, just cameos, right? Caleb and I were talking we recorded our episode for Downtime this morning, and we were talking about how, so what is that, episode 6 of 26 of season 1? Had Lagoon Boy in the background.
Right.
And whether it's a callback or a planned, introduction for the future, either way, it was just amazing, right?
Yeah, once you realize, everyone who shows up for a reason.
Yeah, and almost everything that happens as part of that larger plan, right?
As prep for just having this conversation today, this morning, I got up early and watched the basically 2-part finale of season 1.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, they brought that back. And they're setting this up for next season.
Yeah.
Wow, this is well planned.
Yeah. And of course, this is one of the reasons why we do the show, right? Because it just became apparent when we were talking about it on social media that there were a lot of people who either were their first introduction to these characters was watching Young Justice, or in some cases, their first introduction to any superhero was Young Justice. So there are a lot of things that you don't need to know for the show, but it's fun to know for the show. Right. And how it connects to the bigger picture and the deeper thought that the writers put into the show. And one of those things, like you touched on again, was that there's very purposeful selection of characters in first season and second season as well. It feels like it's both purposeful and easy right? The way it should always have been. Having Wonder Girl, Batgirl, Bumblebee, all of these characters coming into the second season, these female characters, no one is really saying, oh my gosh, look, there's a female superhero. That's amazing. I can't believe that they're a female superhero. Nobody cares.
Yeah, it's not a conversation that needs to be had at this point in time.
It shouldn't ever be a conversation to be had, right? Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, Blue Beetle was, come on, guys. Heroes are heroes, right? And it shouldn't be something that needs to be pointed out. And that's one of the things that I appreciated about the show, having a daughter myself, is being able to feel like I can have her watch that, particularly the second season, and see strong female characters dealing with difficult personal issues.
Yeah, I think something that you see a lot now, and there's a lot of consternation among some areas of Twitter, is you have these old iconic characters who, for the most part, are men and are white and are straight.
Right.
And, new media is being created about them. Yeah. But in order to make these stories more accessible and more representative, sometimes new characters are introduced, accessory characters, or sometimes there's, race bending or gender bending.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've seen that with, people getting really upset that, oh my God, there's a black stormtrooper, which of course makes sense if you actually know anything about Star Wars.
Right.
But I think that Young Justice is almost like a primer on how to advance characters that have existed for decades and to make them more representative of, well, what American culture has honestly always looked like, but that people more recently are admitting that it actually looks like.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with you. And when we get into the second season too, we start introducing, like Jaime Reyes. Mm-hmm. I have to be honest, I love Ted Kord, the original Blue Beetle, for all of his silliness and wackiness. He was a great character, and he died in the regular comics, and they introduced the new Blue Beetle, and I didn't know that much about him, and I didn't really get into him. The powered armored, thing just wasn't something I was into. So when I saw him in this second season, I wasn't sure what to expect, and oh my God, I don't even know what to say. I love Jaime. He's just a fantastic character across the board, and the way they introduced and played back on the original Super Friends show, even with that group of runaways, right? So
right, Static shows up. Yeah,
Static shows up. The Tai Longshadow is clearly them, trying to fix Apache Chief from the old Super Friends.
God,
and the way they did it, the way they represented his growth ability with that psychic aura thing was just a bit of genius. So yeah, being able to pay homage to these old things, and still improve them or expand them, widen them, tweak the recipe and make it something that is meaningful to a wide range of people.
Yeah, I think when it's done properly, as Young Justice proves that it can be done, it adds to the character. It adds depth. And, people are fine with or get used to, for the most part, reboots of their favorite character, or, a new writer or illustrator comes in and, Spider-Man and Mary Jane aren't married anymore, or fine, okay, I get used to that. Or Superman's dead, now he's not dead.
Right.
We are comic book fans, and the genre of superheroes is so malleable. The stories never stay the same. There's no canon. We're talking about Earth 16, right?
Right, exactly.
So I'm probably preaching to the choir right now, but, give these characters a chance, and you're probably going to find that you're going to discover something amazing. Because, these are the writers that you trust normally. So, let them do their thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point, because it's funny when we see things on other media, particularly in the movies, and the idea of, these geeks are just upset because it's not, exactly like the comics. I'm like, you have no idea how much these characters change. Right. And over 85 years, are you kidding me right now? No, the problem is that they can change all they want, but the heart of the character is the same.
Yeah, it's like people who say second edition Dungeons and Dragons was the only way, the real way that it was supposed to be played. Well, no, dude, that wasn't even the first iteration of it. It keeps changing all the time.
Right. And I started back in the basic and first edition days. And it was the kids from Stranger Things. We didn't know what we were doing. We were rolling to hits on fireballs, I'm sure. I don't know what we were playing, but I'm glad there weren't recordings of whatever mishmashed, made up, whatever we were talking about back then. It was nuts. It was bonkers. But the heart of the idea is the same, right? You're getting around the table and telling stories with your friends with some semblance of, quantification on your playing pretend. But with these characters too, the Dick Grayson Robin is not the Dick Grayson Robin from the 1940s, right? He's a computer hacker. His costume is the Tim Drake Robin costume. Like, and in fact, a lot of people thought it was Tim Drake because he was a hacker and he had the same costume, et cetera, et cetera. But the heart of Dick Grayson is still there, always there. And you can change him and change how he transitioned into Nightwing, or change the origin story of Beast Boy to that was absolute genius.
Yeah, it was masterfully done.
Masterfully is the word, absolutely. And then having nods to the original origin. So he was bitten by a green monkey in the woods that gave him shape-shifting powers, blah, blah, blah. Well, after Miss Martian gives him that blood transfusion, after he gets hit in the Bialyan attack, you see Monkey, his pet monkey, sitting on his shoulder, chewing on his shoulder, right after Miss Martian gives him the transfusion. So you kind of see, these, like, we know what we're doing. They're painting it red. Like, we know what the original origin was, and we're making it work. We're taking the heart of this character and tying it tightly, emotionally, to other characters in this show.
Yeah, they did an excellent job of lampshading a lot of these things.
Absolutely.
And that also really helped tie in Miss Martian, who, to the fans sort of seems like, who is this new character? We don't really know her. Is she Martian Manhunter, but just like younger and a girl? What's going on? Right,
exactly. And in that episode, that episode's where we get the big reveal, too, of the whole Hello Megan TV show thing that happened. And she gets more serious because things got serious. And she had to take things to a different place and become more herself. And I think you were nodding to this a little earlier too, like with Connor and other characters, you get these, like Connor and his potential addiction issues to this, to the shields, and Miss Martian trying to become herself instead of imitating other things, someone else of what she's supposed to be, because she doesn't want to be who she was born to be. These are deep concepts and ideas that people can relate to across the board, like with the X-Men. Why her fear of rejection is the cornerstone of Miss Martian's story arc. Who can't relate to that?
The decisions, the mistakes that she makes, and her eventual resolution.
Yeah, if you can call it a resolution, yeah. And her choices in season 2, horrifying choices in season 2. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about female representation and racial representation. There's a wider DC universe and a richness to Young Justice. It's not just about the team. So I know that you're a trained writer. Yes.
That's true. Yes.
That is true. And an eloquent speaker. I imagine that you break things down when you're watching it. If you're watching a TV show or a movie, are you looking at it for elements of storytelling, like what works, what doesn't work? Are you able to let all of that go when you're watching a show, to just enjoy it for what it is?
That's interesting. In a TV series, I think I analyze a lot more. With like a movie, I think there's an understanding that it's a big spectacle, and maybe you can't cram anything in it. And that might be my history with Star Trek, right? Like I watch a Star Trek series, and every episode is like deep and meaningful and has this like moral. But the movie is just like, this is 2 hours of things blowing up, and we're cool with that because like we have the series for the character development, honestly.
Gotcha.
With something like Young Justice, it's impossible to totally shut off the analysis and like stop thinking about, okay, where's this character going to go? Oh, wow, that decision or that reaction felt real to me. Oh, that reminds me, even maybe on a subconscious emotional level, of a time that I was feeling those sorts of things. Man, did I make a big mistake? I wonder how they're going to get out of it. And then even on a higher sort of meta level, wow, what were the writers thinking when they did this? Or how were they going to write themselves out of this?
Out of this corner, yeah.
Yeah.
If it is a corner, right? In some ways, we see this in shows where they don't handle that writing out of the corner very well. They're throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks and then kind of moving forward with, shows like Lost or something like that had some very cool ideas and some great callbacks and was okay, but it wasn't what I expected. I expected them to have a plan, right?
I was actually just going to point to Lost. Watching Young Justice, when you're watching it while it was broadcasting, there was this sort of internal tension, like, wait, is this going to be like Lost? Like, it feels like this is moving in a direction and like everything happens for a reason and like this is totally going to like come together and it's going to be awesome. But what if it doesn't? Yeah. Like, what if it just totally falls apart and like the reach is dumb and like the light is like robots. It's just android robots and And like, it didn't happen. It was amazing all the way through. But I think looking at it back now, where there aren't any new episodes, fingers crossed, I think anyone who is trying to take away lessons about writing or storytelling needs to keep in mind that for the audience who was watching it, you didn't know that it was going to turn out well.
Yeah.
And while that made things tense, it also really invested you even more in the story.
Yeah, we talk about this a little bit in the early episodes. The idea that the first few episodes they weren't really hit and miss, but we were so trained with different kinds of TV watching that the first couple episodes were great. Happy Harbor was not one of my favorites. And then we kind of got into Drop Zone, and Drop Zone was really good. And I'm like, this is interesting. And then we find out Robin's not going to be the leader. And I'm like, wait, Robin's not leading the Teen Titans? What? And then we get into Schooled in that opening scene with Connor and Superman, where Connor's kind of cracking open and saying, please help me, guide me, be a mentor to me. And Superman literally turns around and flies away. And then, Bruce Wayne is giving you parenting advice at a cafe. That's the episode that hit me that something deeper and more interesting was happening.
Yeah, I think you guys mentioned this a bit in episode 0, but it's a hallmark of good writing that this show and the way that these characters are portrayed opens up new windows into characters who aren't the central focus of this story. You learn something about Superman from Young Justice, even though he just kind of shows up sometimes.
Yeah.
You learn something about Batman because, that's one of the beauties I think about focusing on sidekicks is that they are in some ways reflections of the original character.
Yes.
And they are foggy mirrors. And that can give so much freedom for a writer, but it takes talent to be able to align those mirrors properly so that they all have the same focal point.
Yeah, exactly. And from a character development standpoint, this broader view, there's such a way that I want to kind of turn this a little bit to role-playing games. So from an NPC standpoint, right? These are basically, you have your team, which is just your cornerstone team. And then you have all of these NPCs. That is the entirety of the DC universe. As I mentioned earlier, this is not just about the team. This is a show about the entire DC galaxy. Yet somehow focuses its through line on the team, but the team doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So you have these little bits and pieces of characters like Lex Luthor or Superman or Batman who only show up at certain points, Can you speak to that from your experience as an experienced gamer and a role player about the use of that for encouraging whether it's writing or gaming, reflecting on your main characters with your supporting cast?
Yeah. Writing and gaming, I think most people know, are very different beasts. Young Justice is so well planned out, you wouldn't want to plan an RPG campaign in nearly this kind of detail because your players are going to screw it up. And that's their job.
I love railroading. Railroading is the best.
You don't understand. I worked out 3 seasons.
It's the only gaming advice I give.
Right. Literally everything happened for a reason. Why didn't you talk to them? Chaotic neutral, man. Sorry,
man.
Kid Flash does what Kid Flash does.
It's not untrue.
That's right. Run across the country. Nah, I'm good. Thanks.
I'm fighting the bad guys.
Right. I'm going to sell this heart.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, that would be a game. That'd be a tabletop game.
I think Shane would do that.
Sarcastro.
Yeah. So I love your characterization of the Justice League as NPCs.
Yeah.
They've got stat blocks over here. They're storytelling devices and they do what I need them to do.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really is the case. And Lex specifically, I think, and then Superman and Batman, the people that the audience probably knows really well are really useful touchstones for the audience because they don't change, right? Superman doesn't really grow, really, he doesn't gain new abilities. He doesn't get more powerful. Maybe he learned something, but Batman at the beginning is the same Batman at the end of the series.
Yes.
It's the team that is growing. So they are perfect rubrics by which the team and therefore the audience can measure the progress that the team has made. We see them at the beginning. I'm thinking at the end of the first hour episode, they finally escaped Cadmus. It's in ruins. And then here comes Superman.
Yeah.
From on high, like an angel.
Yes.
And the angle, the camera angle is, up at him. And he's just descending because he has decided that he will grace you with his presence.
Right. Exactly.
I could have been here, but I was literally saving the whole solar system. And like, are you causing problems? Because it seems like you're causing problems. And then like 24, 25 episodes later, he's like, thank you for saving the world. You know?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Like coming from Superman, that means something. And even if you'd never seen a superhero anything before, if you watched the entire season all the way through, it's very easy to understand that the team has accomplished something. They have grown, they are more powerful, but they also have changed their place within this greater DC universe.
Yes, I agree. That final scene where Superman says, I heard you took a name.
Oh, yeah.
And he says Connor Kent, and says my secret identity is Clark Kent. And Superboy's all like sketched. He's like, man, I didn't know. This was like, it wasn't me. Like I wasn't trying to be something. And he's like, no, it's good. This is good. And then seeing them in the early episodes of the second season, less like a father-son relationship and more like a brother-to-brother, like a big brother to little brother relationship, which I think both of them are far more comfortable with. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Because I think Superman, this fatherhood thing, like thrust on him situation, maybe not so much, but finding out you have a little brother, that becomes something different maybe. I don't know. It's interesting.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that, because in retrospect, I think certainly one of the reasons that Superman leaves early on, right? He just sort of dismisses Superboy is that, like, you know, he's basically shown up and be like, you're my dad. And like Superman saves the world, but he doesn't like have a deep one-on-one relationship with one person other than like Lois Lane, you know?
Right. Who we'd never see in Young Justice.
Right. I mean, is she ever named? Like, does she necessarily exist?
It never comes up. Like, I'm sure she probably does, but I don't want to make assumptions anymore because I've made those kind of assumptions and Greg Weisman has smacked me down personally. So I don't want to make too many assumptions. I feel
maybe he's dating Wonder Woman.
I feel. Okay, you stun me. You stun me in my tracks. I don't want to get on that. But I mean, I can make a fair assumption that Lois probably exists in this Earth. But we don't see that relationship. And so you can feel like he's maybe choosing to hold off on that, or it hasn't happened yet, or he's still trying to figure out what kind of relationship he could possibly have. Like, and he didn't make that choice. So I don't know. But a big brother, little brother, maybe it's a little different. I don't know.
And I think in this sort of broader conversation that we're having about, you know, inclusion, I think it's important to point out that also it's not necessarily restricted to, you know, gender or race or sexual orientation. Like the Superboy Superman story has so much meaning for maybe someone who was adopted or, you know, someone who is estranged from a family member.
Right, absolutely. I agree. The different family dynamics in an episode like Downtime, where you see Wally with his whole family, like he's got Jay Garrick and basically grandparents and his parents, and they all know he's got superpowers and they love him and blah, 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 and his uncle is, you know, a superhero that he's admired since he was a kid. And then you cut to a character like Artemis, who has, you know, one parent who was a criminal and not living in a place that, you know, living poor. And then you cut to Robin, who's living rich, but then has this father figure who's so difficult at times for him. And then Superboy, who has no one. You know, and Miss Martian, who apparently has a large family, but is, you know, trying to be something she's not. There just seems to be something for everyone, whether it's a female-male representation or racial representation or a family dynamic representation. There seems to be a lot to be had. They don't get much into sexual orientation conversations.
It's true. I was looking at, like I said, I watched the finale of season 1. And I mean, yes, view it through the lens of its times. It's a cartoon that came out a few years ago, and we haven't made all that much progress in media. Like at the end, hey, we've saved the world and it's New Year's, let's all pair off. And like, you know, the African-American girl is the one who like kisses Calder, who is like a dark-skinned Atlantean. Like, whatever, you know?
I hear you. That definitely jumped out at me as well. With some of the relationships that were already established, it was like they took a long time. It wasn't just a spontaneous thing. So it was like, Wally and Artemis, that's been going on for 26 episodes, right? Sorry, 20 episodes, I guess. She was introduced late. But at least it felt like it made sense with the pairings, I guess. And Calder had left Tula and not made any other kind of dynamics. So part of it is okay and part of it is jumps out, you know?
And I think it jumps out because it is not the norm. You know, I think in many other TV shows, and particularly like animated shows and shows that are directed toward children and shows that deal with IPs that are decades old, you don't even get nearly the amount of diversity that you got from Young Justice. And so it's sort of normal, and it doesn't jump out at you because it's just everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Are there any other things that you want to talk about? For I know there's probably a lot of people listening to you because they're fans of the gaming podcast.
All 4 of them, yeah.
Yeah,
I guess.
Five, I think. Don't you guys have 5?
I was not able to keep it the payment, so we're down to 4.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad my payment's still coming.
Plasma doesn't get you nearly as much cash as it used to.
I really want to talk about, we started talking about the NPCs and support and role-playing games. We're going to have Steve Kenson on the show as well, talking about kind of gaming in that aspect too. But is there anything else you want to add about from a role-playing game standpoint, things you think generally that people can learn about storytelling and tabletop gaming from the show?
I think it's a gold mine for ideas and for plot hooks. It depends on how much time you have on your hands, how much you can pull out of this. I mean, it's great for inspiration, but I genuinely think, and this isn't a recommendation that I would say about most television shows or even most media, I wouldn't say it about Game of Thrones, is you can sit down and sort of map out the relationships from episode to episode and across an entire season. And you can map out the main plot points and see how they get pulled through in arcs that seemingly resolve themselves. And, as a viewer, you're watching and you're thinking, oh, well, that's done. That's taken care of.
Yeah.
And it's not even necessarily that there is a short scene. Sometimes there is, but there isn't always a short scene where you see haha, it turns out it's not actually resolved because Bane has freed himself and now he's making more venom. It just happens later, and then there's a flashback or someone explains it with a quick witty one-liner. Oh, hey, well, this is why the thing that you thought was resolved is no longer resolved. Get over it.
Right. There is no mole. When Roy says there is no mole, I was wrong the whole time.
These are really useful storytelling devices for any GM because for the most part, your audience when you are running a role-playing game is almost assuredly the same type of people who are watching this show.
Yeah.
So, and they may not like superheroes or they may not watch this show in particular, but they're the kind of person who likes this kind of medium. Mm-hmm. So watching it and learning from it, that the lessons and the techniques that are so effective on you when you're watching it are going to be effective on your players. If on a third watch, you're going, oh, I don't know why, I didn't notice this before, and I guess it really shouldn't have been really obvious. That's something that in your game life, you may be able to learn, don't second guess yourself. Maybe this seems really obvious to you, but chances are your players are not going to pick up on this one thing. Mm-hmm. Just go with it. And then once they get to the reveal, it's going to be worth it for them. There's always this level of suspension of disbelief. Same with a superhero game. It's much easier when you're doing a role-playing game because we're not anywhere else and there isn't something visual happening, taking up 90% of our frontal cortex. We are all pretending that we're not sitting in a room eating pizza. So the suspension of disbelief is there. You already have this investment in this buy-in. You've got an easier time than the people who made this show have. Your audience is on your side. Young Justice didn't necessarily have that.
I love it. That's fantastic. All right, I-Hsien, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love it if you would let people know how to get a hold of you so that they can give you the smackdown about, Vandal Savage had it all right.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, come on, let's start a movement here. I mean, he's still out there, right? How are you going to kill him? You're not.
That's fair. That's fair.
You can reach me directly on Twitter at Evil Sans Carne. That's malice minus meat. You can also email us at the show at TPTcast on Twitter. We've got Facebook and Instagram. Those are at Total Party Thrill. And you can email us totalpartythrill@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, I-Hsien, for coming on the show.
Oh, this is tons of fun.
I'm so glad. All right, guys, thanks for joining us for another interview here in the cave. If you want to find us, you can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files. You can find us at our website, www.crashingthemode.com. If you want to email us directly and the 140 characters aren't enough, you can contact us at whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us now on Facebook, www.facebook.com/crashingthemode. I highly recommend you go and check out TPTcast. Shane and I-Hsien are fantastic hosts. with fascinating stories. You can learn a lot, both about role-playing games, but also storytelling in general. And we thank I-Hsien again for coming on the show. Remember, everybody, keep feeling the Aster. We'll see you next time, and keep binging YJ.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.